My stepfather forced me to co-sign loans. When I complained, my mom said, "Stop playing victim. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about." I was 28 when I finally saw what my life had become. My small apartment looked like a graveyard of unopened letters, bills, final notices, red stamps screaming past due. Every corner reminded me of how my own family had destroyed me. The weight of it all made my hands shake. Each envelope carried the name Marissa Blake, my name, next to debts I didn't make. It all began years ago, when I was 20. I had just been accepted into college, full of hope, still living at home in rural Ohio with my mom, Diane, and my stepfather, Gerald Knox. He was charming in public, always cracking jokes, acting like the man who saved our family after my real dad left. I wanted to believe he cared. One evening, Gerald called me into the kitchen. He said, "You've got good credit, kiddo. We just need you to co-sign a small loan so we can fix the truck. It'll help the family." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. My mom nodded along, saying, "It's just paperwork. He'll handle the payments." I didn't want to disappoint them, so I signed. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Gerald kept up his friendly act, grilling burgers on weekends, calling me kiddo like always. But little things started to feel off. I'd hear hushed arguments between him and my mom about money. I saw bills shoved into drawers. And when I asked, they said, "Don't worry, it's handled." A few months later, I got a letter from the bank. Missed payment. My name was on it. I asked Gerald about it, and he laughed, saying, "Relax, it's just a mix-up. Adults take care of these things." I wanted to believe him, but something inside me twisted. Then another letter came. And another. Soon there were calls from collectors asking for thousands of dollars. I remember sitting on my bed, staring at the phone, trying to breathe. I went to my mom, expecting her to be angry at him. Instead, she sighed and said, "Stop playing victim, Marissa. He's done so much for us." That night, I looked at the papers spread across my desk. My name was on every single loan. Gerald's small loan wasn't small at all. It was the first of many. And before I even understood how, my life had already been sold away. Gerald knew how to play the part of a perfect stepdad. To anyone looking from the outside, he seemed like a man who cared deeply about his family. On weekends, he'd grill in the backyard, laughing too loud, passing burgers around, and telling stories that made everyone smile. He'd slap neighbors on the back and say things like, "Family first, that's my rule." People admired him. They called him dependable, hardworking, solid. No one saw what he was really like when the guests went home. My mom, Diane, believed every word that came out of his mouth. She adored him in a way that made me feel invisible. Whenever I tried to question him, she'd jump to his defense instantly. "Gerald's been more of a father to you than your real one ever was," she'd say sharply, as if reminding me of how much I owed him. And maybe for a while I believed her. I thought maybe my unease came from not having a real father around, that maybe I just didn't understand how families worked anymore. But the truth started showing in little cracks. I noticed envelopes tucked under piles of magazines, phone calls taken outside late at night, and a look in Gerald's eyes that turned sharp whenever money came up. Once, I asked why he was whispering on the phone, and he smiled too quickly. "Just business, kiddo. You don't need to worry about adult stuff." His smile didn't reach his eyes. A few weeks later, he brought up another favor. He said his work truck needed repairs and that he couldn't get approval for another loan because the bank was being difficult. He leaned on the table, talking softly, like we were partners in something. "It'll be fast. I'll pay it off before you even notice. You trust me, right?" My mom stood behind him, nodding like a puppet, her arms crossed. I didn't want another argument, so I signed again. For a short while, things were calm. Gerald acted extra kind, cracking jokes, cooking dinner, even calling me princess. I wanted to believe things were getting better. But then the bills started coming again, this time thicker, heavier. Late fees. Overdue notices. My name at the top of every page. When I asked him about it, my voice shaking, he just laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Relax, princess," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Adults handle these things." That's when I finally started to understand. He wasn't joking. He never had been. I thought my mom would understand. After all, she was the one person I still believed I could turn to. One night, I sat across from her at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I showed her the stack of bills with my name on them. I told her the truth, that Gerald wasn't paying anything back, that my credit was already ruined, and that I didn't know what to do. I expected her to be angry at him, maybe even to hold me while I cried. But instead, her face turned cold. She didn't look sad or worried. She looked annoyed. "Marissa," she said slowly, "why do you always have to start drama? You're trying to ruin the family's peace." Her voice cut through me like a blade. I tried to explain again, my voice cracking, but she kept going. "Gerald works hard for us, and all you do is complain. You're ungrateful." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom, the woman who used to tell me to never let anyone take advantage of me, was now defending the man who'd done exactly that. It felt like she had picked her side, and it wasn't mine. I left the table in silence, my heart breaking in a way I didn't know was possible. A few weeks later, I found out she had done something I never could have imagined. One of the banks called me about a loan I didn't recognize. When I checked the paperwork, I saw my name, my signature, but it wasn't mine. I confronted her, shaking the papers in front of her. She didn't even deny it. She just said, "You'd do it anyway if you loved me. This family needs help." I didn't even know what to say. My mother had stolen my name. She'd crossed a line I thought no mother could. From that day, something inside me shut off. I stopped talking to her unless I had to. My friends tried to reach out at first, but I kept pushing them away. Every conversation ended with me crying about money or bills, and soon they stopped calling. My world became small, just work, debt, and silence. One night, while walking past the living room, I heard my mom and Gerald arguing. Their voices were sharp and tense. I paused when I heard my name. Gerald said, "She's still useful. The banks trust her." My mom didn't argue. She just sighed. That's when I realized they hadn't used me by mistake. They had planned it together from the start. My life started falling apart faster than I could hold it together. Every time I tried to fix one problem, 3 more showed up. My credit was destroyed. I couldn't even open a simple account without being rejected. Job applications that once gave me hope now ended in silence after background checks. A few employers told me directly, "Sorry, we can't take the risk with your financial record." It was humiliating. I had done nothing wrong, yet everywhere I turned, it felt like the world saw me as a liar or a thief. When I tried to move out and start fresh, no one would rent to me. My name was on too many unpaid loans, and my score was ruined. Every apartment manager looked at me like I was trouble. Eventually, I found a small, broken-down room above an old garage on the edge of town. The paint peeled from the walls, and the heater barely worked. It smelled like mold, but it was all I could afford. Then Gerald made things worse. He had been helping me with a few bills before, pretending to make things right. But one month, he just stopped paying. He said it was a mix-up, but I knew better. Because of that, the landlord at my old place kicked me out. I remember standing outside with my boxes, rain soaking through my clothes, thinking, how did I end up here? The calls from collection agencies never stopped. Morning, afternoon, night, it didn't matter. My phone buzzed constantly with voices demanding money I didn't have. Some were polite at first, but most were cold. They didn't care about my story. They just wanted payment. I tried explaining, but no one believed me. I was tired, broke, and scared all the time. One night, I called my mom. My voice trembled as I told her I couldn't do it anymore. I asked for help, just a small amount to cover rent until I could find steady work. There was a long pause before she answered. Then she said flatly, "You made your bed, now lie in it." The line went silent after that. I sat there for a long time, holding the phone to my ear even after she hung up. That was the moment something inside me broke completely. I realized my family wasn't going to save me. So I stopped calling. I stopped hoping. I promised myself I'd never speak to them again. Years passed before things started to feel even a little normal again. By the time I turned 26, my life looked nothing like what I'd imagined in college. I worked 2 jobs, one at a small diner during the day and another cleaning offices late at night. My hands were always tired, my back ached, but I was slowly paying off debts that weren't even mine. Every time I sent a payment, I reminded myself that I was buying my freedom, one painful dollar at a time. I kept to myself most days. I didn't trust anyone easily anymore. I had learned what it meant to be betrayed by people who were supposed to love you. The only peace I found came from routine. Wake up, work, eat, work again, sleep. Then one day, a customer at the diner left a business card under his coffee cup. His name was Ethan Lowe. He wasn't like the men I'd known. He spoke softly, listened carefully, and when I finally gathered the courage to ask about repairing credit, he didn't make me feel stupid. Ethan worked as a financial advisor in town. When he looked at my file, he didn't judge me for the mess I was in. He just said, "You've survived worse than bad numbers. We can fix this." For the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of hope. Every week, I'd meet him after my shifts. He'd go over forms with me, explaining everything slowly. He told me which accounts to close, which to rebuild, and how to dispute false charges. But even as I tried to move forward, the past never stayed quiet. Sometimes, while sitting across from Ethan, I'd hear Gerald's voice in my head, mocking me the way he used to. "Relax, princess. Adults handle these things." I'd remember my mother's cold expression and her words that still cut deep. "You're ungrateful." It made my stomach twist every time. Ethan noticed once when I went quiet and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, but he could tell I wasn't. One evening, while reviewing my credit history, Ethan frowned. "Some of these loans, are you sure you signed for them?" he asked. My chest tightened. I told him everything, from the first cosign to my mom's betrayal. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward and said, "Marissa, this isn't just bad luck. This is fraud. You can fight this legally." His words stayed with me all night. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to live as a victim. I could fight back. The next day, I gathered every old document I still had, bank letters, copies of contracts, even scraps of notes I'd saved. I went to the courthouse library and began digging. When I finally found Gerald's full financial record, my hands froze. There, buried among dozens of documents, was something I never expected to see. Proof that I wasn't the only one he'd stolen from. When I looked through Gerald's records, I expected to see a few shady loans, maybe another one or two in my name. But what I found made my stomach turn. There were dozens of them, different banks, different people. Some were under the names of relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. And then I saw it, my late grandmother's name. She had passed away 5 years ago, and yet there it was, written in his bold handwriting as a cosigner. He had used a dead woman's name to get money. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, feeling sick. Every memory I had of him pretending to be kind, calling me princess, flashed through my head. He hadn't just used me. He built an entire web of lies around the people who trusted him. I needed proof that it wasn't just my word against his. So I started calling the banks listed on the documents. Most wouldn't tell me much, but one gave me the contact of a notary who had stamped several of Gerald's forms. The notary's name was Samuel Dwyer, an older man with a tired voice. When I met him in a small coffee shop, he looked nervous. At first, he denied knowing anything. But when I showed him copies of the forged forms, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "Gerald said it was for family help," he admitted quietly. He brought the papers already signed. I didn't think to question it. His voice shook as he spoke, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. He agreed to write a statement confirming what he had just told me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept running in circles. What should I do with this information? Part of me wanted to let it go, to just focus on rebuilding my life and staying away from him forever. But another part of me, the part that still heard my mother's voice saying stop playing victim, burned with anger. She had chosen him over me. She had helped him destroy me. Why should I protect either of them anymore? The next morning, I made my choice. I pulled out a notebook and began listing every piece of evidence I had. Signed loans, fake signatures, Samuel's written statement, and copies of my grandmother's name on legal documents. I started organizing everything into folders, labeling each by date and bank. Every click of the stapler felt like a small act of taking my power back. Ethan noticed the change in me. "You look different," he said softly one evening. "Lighter." I didn't tell him everything, only that I was finally doing something about my past. As I filed the last set of documents, I logged into an online records portal to check one final thing. My hands froze when I saw the most recent entry. Gerald had just applied for a brand new loan. This time, though, he hadn't used anyone else's name. It was all in his own. I couldn't help it. A small, cold smile spread across my face. It was his turn to face the mess he'd created. It had been almost 4 years since I'd seen either of them. I had imagined this day 100 different ways, but when it finally came, I felt strangely calm. I called my mother first, told her I wanted to make peace, that I missed her, and maybe we could all have dinner together. She sounded surprised but agreed right away. I could hear the hope in her voice. I didn't tell her that I had already decided exactly how the night would end. When I arrived at their house, everything looked the same. The porch light flickered, the garden was half dead, and the same old wind chime clinked softly in the breeze. Diane opened the door and hugged me awkwardly, as if she wasn't sure if she should. Gerald followed, wearing that same fake grin I remembered too well. "Look who finally came home," he said, his voice filled with sarcasm. At dinner, I played my part. I smiled, asked about their lives, pretended to laugh at his jokes. I even complimented his cooking. Inside, my heart pounded, but I kept my face calm. Hidden under the table, my phone was recording everything. I told myself to breathe, to let him talk. People like Gerald always give themselves away. They just need someone to listen long enough. He started bragging before the food was even gone. "You know, Marissa," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you turned out pretty smart for someone who tanked her own credit." He laughed, slapping the table, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Guess you learned a few things from me after all." My stomach turned, but I didn't react. I simply smiled and asked, "Speaking of that, remember that loan from Capital Line? The one Grandma's name was on." Gerald froze for just a second, then smirked. "Oh, that? Yeah, that one wasn't exactly clean." He chuckled, shaking his head. "But who cares now? No one's gonna dig through old paperwork." He thought he was being clever. He thought I was still that scared, quiet girl he could control. I looked at my mom then. She wasn't laughing. Her fork rested on her plate, untouched. Her eyes were fixed on him, wide and wet, like she was finally seeing him for the first time. She didn't speak, didn't defend him. She just sat there, shaking slightly. I let the silence hang for a moment, then stood up. "You're right, Gerald," I said softly. "No one cares about old paperwork, except the ones who kept it." I walked to the door slowly, my heart steady. Neither of them said a word. Gerald just looked confused, and my mother couldn't even meet my eyes. Outside, I took a deep breath. The phone in my pocket was still recording, catching his careless confession word for word. I walked away into the cool night, knowing he had no idea what he'd just done. The next morning after that dinner, I knew there was no turning back. I spent the entire day gathering every document, every piece of proof I had collected over the years. I printed out the records of the forged loans, Samuel's written statement, and the recording from the night before. When everything was in order, I went to the local police station and filed an official report. My hands were trembling, but my voice stayed steady as I told the officer everything from the beginning. I wasn't scared anymore. After that, I sent copies of the evidence to the banks and creditors that had my name on file. It took hours to explain the situation over and over, but each person I spoke to listened carefully once they heard the word fraud. One of them even said, "You did the right thing coming forward, Ms. Blake." Hearing that made something loosen in my chest. For the first time, someone believed me. It didn't take long for things to start moving. A week later, investigators contacted me for follow-up questions. They asked about Gerald's work, his business, and anyone who might have helped him. I told them about his partner, a man named Ray Collins. Within days, both of them were being questioned. Then news started spreading. Gerald had opened multiple fake accounts under other people's names. Some of the loans went back almost a decade. Meanwhile, my mother's life started falling apart. Her friends stopped coming around, and neighbors whispered whenever she stepped outside. Gerald's accounts were frozen, and since she shared some of them, hers were too. The woman who once called me ungrateful now had nothing left. I heard from someone in town that she'd been visiting banks, trying to fix things, but no one wanted to help. Despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was my mother. I remembered the nights when she used to brush my hair, when she told me stories before bed. But then I'd remember her voice telling me, "You made your bed, now lie in it." That memory always hardened me again. I knew she was paying for the choices she made, and as much as it hurt, I couldn't save her this time. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man from the police department told me Gerald had been arrested. The words hit me like a wave. I didn't cheer or cry. I just felt a deep, quiet relief. The nightmare was finally over. That night, my phone rang again. It was my mother. I watched it buzz on the table, her name glowing on the screen. I could almost hear her voice in my head, crying, asking for help. My chest ached, but I didn't pick up. I let it ring until it stopped. For once, the silence felt peaceful. The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee, the kind that never quite goes away. I sat in the witness chair, facing the man who had destroyed years of my life. Gerald looked smaller than I remembered, but his smirk was still the same. He leaned back in his seat like he didn't have a care in the world. Every time I spoke, he rolled his eyes or whispered something to his lawyer, trying to make me look like I was overreacting. When the prosecutor asked me to describe what happened, I told the truth, how he'd used my name, my grandmother's name, and even others in the family to take out loans. I explained how he forged signatures and laughed when I begged him to stop. The room was silent except for my voice. Gerald tried to interrupt once, muttering that I was dramatic, but the judge quickly shut him down. After hours of testimony, they called a few more witnesses. The notary, Samuel, testified too, confirming everything I had said. Then the bank representatives came forward, explaining the trail of fake accounts and false paperwork. Piece by piece, the picture of who Gerald really was became clear to everyone in that courtroom. Still, he kept that smug grin, as if none of it mattered. When it was time for the verdict, the judge's voice was calm but firm. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud and forgery. The words hung in the air. Gerald didn't look at me. He just stared at the table, his jaw tight. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I felt both lighter and heavier at once. It was finally over, but it had taken so much out of me to get there. After the trial, I got a call from my mother. She wanted to meet. Against my better judgment, I went. She was sitting alone in her small living room when I arrived, looking older and thinner. "I'm sorry, Marissa," she said softly. Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I didn't know what he was doing. I thought he was helping us. It wasn't much of an apology. It was more like an excuse. For a while, I sat there, waiting for something real, some sign that she finally understood what she'd done to me. But it never came. She just kept talking in circles, trying to explain, trying to make it sound like none of it had been her fault. Finally, I stood up. "You could have stopped him," I said quietly. "You just didn't want to." She didn't answer. I walked out of the house without looking back. Outside, the air was cool and still. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. The weight that had sat on my chest for so long was gone. I didn't need her forgiveness, or anyone else's. I was finally free. 2 years passed, and my life looked completely different. The woman I was back then, scared, broke, and full of anger, was gone. I had built something new from the ashes of everything Gerald and my mother had taken from me. With the help of long nights, constant learning, and endless patience, I had started my own small financial consulting business in a modest office downtown. I called it Clear Path Financial. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every morning, I walked through that glass door, unlocked my office, and smiled at the simple sign with my name on it. The first time I helped someone fix their credit or spot a scam, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known before. I wanted to make sure no one else fell for the same kind of manipulation that nearly destroyed me. People came in scared, nervous, ashamed, and I understood them better than anyone could. I'd sit with them, explain things slowly, just like Ethan once did for me. Business grew slowly but steadily. Most days were quiet, filled with the soft sound of keyboards and the smell of coffee. Some evenings, I'd stay late, reviewing cases by the warm desk lamp. Sometimes I'd look up at the framed certificate on my wall, reminding me of how far I had come. I didn't have much family left, but I had peace. That was something worth more than anything money could buy. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. My name was printed neatly on the envelope. I opened it carefully, and inside was my new credit report. For a moment, I just stared at the numbers, my heart pounding. Everything, every false debt, every red mark, every trace of the damage was gone. My record was completely clean. My hands shook a little as I held the paper. It wasn't just a credit score. It was proof that I had survived. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window. The sun was setting, turning the glass buildings gold. I thought about my mother for a moment, about how she chose someone else over her own daughter. I thought about Gerald and the lies he told, and how he once looked at me like I'd never escape his control. But I had. I had done it without their help, without their approval, without anyone saving me. I realized that what I had now, freedom, peace, and purpose, was worth more than any family name or false love. The pain they gave me had built my strength. I folded the report and placed it neatly in a drawer. As I turned off the light and locked the office door behind me, I smiled softly to myself. He thought he ruined my life. But in the end, he just financed my rebirth.